Gmar Chatima Tova. A few weeks ago, I overheard two people chatting. One asked the other, "So, what's your story?" Now, it wasn't meant to be profound, just small talk. But I watched as the woman hesitated. She started with, "Well, I'm retired now," then shifted, "I've got 2 grandchildren." Then she laughed nervously and said, "I guess my story depends on the day." That moment struck me, because isn't it true for all of us? We each carry a story, but it's not always easy to name it. We try. Sometimes we reach for labels or roles, but often we don't even know where to begin. Kol Nidrei demands that we begin. That haunting melody that we heard is a cry that's bigger than words, a story of the Jewish soul that insists on being told. And so tonight, as we step into Yom Kippur, I ask a question that may sound simple, but it's not simple at all. What's your story? I don't mean your resume, where you were born, what you studied, what you do for a living. I don't mean that quick version that we give at a cocktail party or in a waiting room. I mean the deeper story, the one that explains not just what you've done, but who you are. The story that reveals your values, your struggles, your courage, your hope. And let me sharpen the question. If your children or your grandchildren or your friends had to tell your story tomorrow, what would they say? Would they know the story that you want remembered? Because here's a hard truth, my friends. If you don't tell your story, somebody else will. Judaism has always known this. From the very beginning, we've been a people of story. Think of Pesach. The central mitzvah of the entire holiday is not just eating matzah or bitter herbs, not drinking 4 cups of wine, not even singing Dayenu. It is Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, our collective story of the Exodus from Egypt. The Torah commands, "V'higadata levanecha bayom hahu," and you shall tell your child on that day, is because of what the Lord did for me when I went free from Egypt. Notice, not what God did for them long ago, what God did for me. Every Jew is commanded to see themselves in the story. That's why we read in the Haggadah, Bechol Dor Vador, in every generation, each person must see themselves as if they personally went out of Egypt. We're not a people who simply recall history. We relive it again and again, each year, each generation. Storytelling is not a side practice of Judaism, it is its beating heart. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory wrote, "Judaism is less about truth as a system than about truth as a story. And we're part of that story. That's what it is to be a Jew." That's why every Jewish holiday, every Jewish ritual is a kind of storytelling. To stop telling is to risk forgetting who we are. But here's the hard question. What happens when the story of our tradition doesn't quite match our personal story? The High Holiday Liturgy is full of language about kings and subjects, guilt and punishment, fear and trembling. And for many of us, it doesn't feel like our reality. Some of us don't experience God as a king on a throne. Some of us don't walk into synagogue feeling broken and sinful, even on Yom Kippur. Some of us don't connect with the imagery of unworthy supplicants standing before a judge. And yet there it is, on the pages of our Machzor, year after year, the same story. So what do? Do we reject it? Do we cross out the lines that don't fit? Do we close the book completely? Our tradition offers another way. First, we listen. Shema Yisrael, hear, O Israel. We dare to actually hear the story, even when it jars us, even when it doesn't line up with who we are. Because if we never really hear the story, how can we ever challenge it? How can we live up to our name of Yisrael, those who struggle with God? How do we let the words touch us? How can we argue with them and wrestle with them and let them change us or even us change them in return? The rabbis taught that Torah has shiv'im panim, 70 faces. In other words, no single story, no single image can contain all of the truth. Which means the story in our prayer book is not meant to erase your personal story. It's meant to stretch it, to provoke it, to force it into dialogue with something larger than itself. And that tension is not only about prayer. Today, we hear it about Judaism in general, especially from our Gen Z Jews. They love justice. They're passionate. They call out hypocrisy when they see it, but too often they claim that the Jewish story they hear doesn't line up with their lived experience or the narratives that they encounter on campus or online. They feel caught between loyalty to their people and the moral questions they are asking, the very questions our tradition has told them to ask. Some feel silenced, others alienated, some even walk away from Judaism altogether. It breaks my heart because they're not rejecting Judaism itself, they're rejecting a story that feels imposed, a story that they have not been invited to truly hear and then to challenge. And that is where our tradition is wiser than we give it credit for. Judaism has always insisted that no one version is the final story. The Torah itself gives us multiple tellings of creation, of Sinai, of the Ten Commandments. The sages argue across the pages of Talmud. The Machzor contains prayers that some of our ancestors recited with trembling and others recited with doubt. The story is always layered, always evolving. So the challenge of our time is not to silence the next generation's questions. The challenge is to help them hear the story in its fullness and then challenge it, wrestle with it. To say, your questions belong here. Your discomfort belongs here. Your yearning for justice belongs here. The Jewish story is strong enough to hold all of these as it has for millennia. And here's the paradox. The very moments when the words feel least like us may be the moments when they have the most to teach us, because they force us to ask, why don't I connect with this? What do I believe instead? Why is my worldview different from that of my parents or my grandparents? And so we keep both. We hold the story of our tradition and the story of our lives in tension. We let them argue with one another, and out of that argument, new chapters emerge. The story of us, right here, right now, still part of the ancient chorus, but with our own verse to add. But here's the danger. If we don't tell that verse, If we leave the telling to others, our story will be written for us. And when someone else writes your story, it can become distorted, even dangerous. There was a chilling article in the Wall Street Journal this year describing something doctors are calling AI psychosis. People who spend hours dialoguing with chatbots start believing the falsehoods that those systems generate. They become convinced that the AI was a supernatural being. Others thought it had discovered earth-shaking scientific truths. They lost hold of reality itself. The danger is obvious. When you let someone or something else narrate your story, you can lose your grip on truth. That danger is as old as Genesis. The very first human being ate from the tree of knowledge, then they hid. God called out to Adam, "Ayeka, where are you?" It is the first question that God ever asks a human being. And Adam, he deflects. He blames Eve. Eve blames the serpent. No one owns their own story. It takes Abraham in our Rosh Hashanah Day 2 reading to give the right answer. When God calls, he replies, "Hineni, here I am." Not, "I'm over here," but I am fully present. I'm not hiding. Hineni is the beginning of Jewish storytelling. It is the courage to step out of shame and fear and say, "Here I am. This is who I am. This is my story." And that brings us to this moment, this year, this Kol Nidrei night. Because today the Jewish story is being rewritten before our eyes and not by us. On college campuses, in city councils, on social media feeds, and in international courts, a new narrative is spreading like wildfire. That Israel is a colonial project foreign to the Middle East. The Jews are white oppressors, not a people long oppressed. That Zionism is racism. That the massacre of October 7th either never happened or worse, that it was justified. And I need to say this as plainly as I can. This story is false. Anti-Semitism has always thrived on false stories. The blood libel, the accusation that Jews use Christian blood in matzah, the protocols of the Elders of Zion, a Russian forgery that claimed that Jews secretly controlled the world, the Dreyfus affair. For centuries, Jews have been blamed for everything that was wrong in the world, from the Black Plague to the crash of the stock market. And of course, Holocaust denial, the obscene claim that 6 million Jews were not murdered. Each one was a story told by others to erase our truth. And yet, when we do tell our story, when Herzl wrote Der Judenstaat, when Holocaust survivors bear witness, when Soviet Jews cry out, "Let my people go," when Ethiopian Jews marched across deserts towards Jerusalem, the world had to listen. So how do we fight anti-Semitism? Yes, we need security guards at our doors. Yes, we need advocacy. But most of all, we need to tell our story. Our ancient rootedness in the land of Israel, a truth carved into every layer of our Bible and archaeology, our centuries of exile and longing, our rebirth in the modern state with all of its miracles and all of its complexities, our moral struggles and our courage, our prophets who demanded justice, our sages who cherished peace, our ancestors who whispered the Shema through the fires of the Shoah. We must tell it. And not just to the world, but today even to our own children. Because if we don't, someone else will. And when others try to hijack our story, we cannot be silent. We cannot be passive. Silent is itself a kind of consent, and in the face of falsehood, silence is dangerous. It is not neutral. It allows someone else's version of our story to harden into truth. And the danger is not only personal, it's national. If we Jews today do not speak, do not claim our voice, others will define Israel. Others will define Zionism. Others will define Judaism itself. And once that falsehood takes root, it is painfully hard to uproot. Our story is not perfect. We are not a perfect people. If we were, we would not have any need of Yom Kippur. But we are a real people with a real history, with a real covenant. To tell our story honestly and with pride is not arrogance, it's survival. That is why silence is not an option. That is why passivity is not an option. That is why the psalmist says, if I had kept silent, I would have been swallowed alive. The world is asking, who are the Jews? What is Israel? What is Zionism? What do we stand for? Our answer must not be silence. Our answer must be, this is our story and we will tell it. However, here is the challenge. You cannot tell a story you have not heard first. And too many of us have forgotten how to hear our own story. Our phones buzz, our feeds refresh endlessly, our minds are pulled 100 directions at once. We are told thousands of stories every day, curated not to enlighten us, but to outrage us, to addict us, to monetize us. And in that flood of noise, how can we possibly hear our own story? I am very grateful to the board of directors for having given me some time in this coming year to reconnect even more deeply with my own Jewish story through a 4-month sabbatical. It will be an opportunity for me to hear parts of our story that I do not normally hear as I spend time in Israel and Eastern Europe learning and teaching. And during that time, I will be disconnecting from social media. Not because I believe technology is inherently evil, but because I need to remind myself how to connect to my family, to the larger Jewish community, to God, to myself. Without disconnection, there is no true connection. And without connection, we cannot tell a story worth telling. I look forward to returning with even more insight in our Jewish story and to be able to share it with all of you. Now, for those of you not able to disconnect from their routine for 4 months, how do we do it? How do we cut through the noise around us to hear that still small voice of our ancient story? First, tell it at your table. Every time you sit down with your children or grandchildren or friends, with neighbors, you have an opportunity. Tell them. Tell them how your grandparents came here. Tell them what your parents sacrificed. Tell them why you light Shabbat candles or why you choose to belong to a synagogue. Don't assume that they know. Stories told around the table are the ones that stay in people's bones. As Jews, we eat, we drink, and we tell our story. That combination is what lasts for generations. Second, mark the moments. Don't let milestones pass without words. Make sure they're part of our story. Write a note when your child becomes bar or bat mitzvah, not just about the party, but about what you hope for their Jewish life. Write down what you felt at your wedding, or at the birth of your first child, or when you buried a loved one. These moments are holy. They deserve words that can be passed on. Third, share your Jewish pride out loud. Wear the Magen David. Put the mezuzah on your door. Don't be afraid to say Shana Tova at work or to explain why you're fasting on Yom Kippur. When you speak openly, you tell your story without needing a microphone. Silence hides us. Pride tells the world, Hineni, I'm here. Fourth, connect through community. Being part of a Jewish community is itself a way of telling the story. When you come to Minyan, when you dance with us on Simchat Torah, when you help prepare a meal for someone in need, you're telling the world and reminding yourself that you belong to something larger than yourself. Fifth, write your chapter. Be honest, be true. It doesn't all have to look perfect. It just needs to be real. One day, your children or your grandchildren will hear it and say, this was their life. This was their voice. This is my story too. And finally, live it. The most powerful story you will ever tell is the life that you actually live. Every act of kindness, every choice to do the right thing when no one is watching. Every time you show up for someone that needs you, that is your story, and people are reading it, even when you don't realize. Kol Nidrei is about more than annulling vows. It's about release from false stories, the vows and labels and lies that have bound us. Tonight we begin again. We inherit a story thousands of years old, and we must carry it forward. And so I return to the question I began with. What is your story? Your story. The one rooted in Torah and truth. The one that links you to Abraham and Sarah, Ruth and Esther, to your grandparents and your grandchildren. Tell it. Tell it with your words. Tell it with your actions. Tell it with your presence. Because if we do not, someone else will. And our story, our beautiful, ancient, sacred story, is too important to be left in anyone else's hands. A teacher once asked all of her students to bring something that told the story of who they were as Jews. Some brought candlesticks, some a Hebrew book, one a faded photograph. But one child came empty-handed. And when asked why, he said, I didn't bring anything because I am the story. My life is proof. Tonight, the world turns its ear towards us. Heaven leans close. What story will we tell? May this be the year we weave our voices into the great tapestry of our people's story so that the next generation inherits not silence, but meaning, purpose, and celebration. Mar Chatima Tova.